Hello and welcome back to Cyfarthfa Castle Museum and Art Gallery. My name is Christopher Parry and I work at Cyfarthfa Castle, and this is another collection connection where we look at objects in our collection and try to look at the history behind them and their connections to other objects within the collection as well. This episode is going to look at this very special object beside me. Now, not many people know the fact that the steam whistle was invented in Merthyr, and when you think of steam whistles, say on trains and things like that, the sound of that steam whistle was literally kind of first heard really in Merthyr through a whistle like this. It was invented by a Cornish engineer called Adrian Stephens. Adrian was born in 1795 and grew up in the mining communities around Cornwall. When he came to Merthyr Tydfil between 1825 and 1827, the same time that this castle around me was being built really, and when he came, he, like his brother James, started working in the Plymouth Ironworks down towards the bottom end of Merthyr town centre really. Now there they became chief engineers, and they were responsible for overseeing and creating the infrastructure to make the iron in those ironworks. Eventually Adrian would move on and take up a job in Dowlais Ironworks, and he would come to be very close friends with Josiah John Guest, the iron master at Dowlais at that time, as well as his wife Lady Charlotte Guest, and they would genuinely call each other friends really. He was chief engineer for Dowlais Works from around 1835, and it was in that year, between 1835 maybe 1836, that a boiler exploded at Dowlais. Now, boilers exploding was a regular occurrence at ironworks, and they were normally due to neglect of the worker, the stoker, the person who was there to keep an eye on the boiler and to make sure the water was topped up. And there is cases of this happening in all Merthyr ironworks across the board really. So after this incident, Josiah John Guest approached Adrian Stephens, knowing how inventive and creative a person he was, and asked him, was there some sort of early warning mechanism that could be put in place to prevent any more deaths and any more problems at the ironworks? So Adrian Stephens went away and tried to think up how he would solve that problem. In a letter to his niece in June of 1872, Adrian decided to document on her request the story of the steam whistle. And in here, he even says he scarcely believes it of any interest to her, but he continued anyway. He was trying to get a specific sound, a harsh, loud sound that could be heard throughout the ironworks. And so he started going through how to achieve that sound. He initially used a standard common whistle, but larger, with no good results. Then he tried the Dowlais House organ pipes with no better success yet again, and then he went on to custom making short copper tubes of like 2 inches in diameter, and as he went forward he would adapt the opening of the steam whistle and change his design many times until he was happy, in his own words, that he had perfected and created a large, harsh and unpleasant but very useful sound. It would be attached inside the boiler with the steam whistle on the outside. When the water run dried and steam would then go up and set off the whistle at the top, they would know that they needed to fill that water immediately before it explodes. This steam whistle here was one of the early examples of this. So this was built around 1835 to 1840, and it was attached to a boiler at Dowlais. This was actually donated by Dowlais Ironworks, that was then owned in 1922 by Guest, Keen and Nettlefold, to the museum. So it's been in our collection since 1922. Coincidentally though, at the same time he was inventing this, people who owned the Manchester to Liverpool railway line were down in Dowlais Ironworks inquiring about various iron products to make for the rails and for the infrastructure for this new railway starting from Manchester to Liverpool. They saw the invention and they would adopt it and replace a version of this which is called the steam trumpet, which is very different in sound, but the mechanisms are similar. But they replaced their steam trumpets with steam whistles by Adrian Stephens on their railways, and slowly but surely every single train and steam engine around the world would have a standard, a steam whistle, and the steam whistle designed by Adrian Stephens in Merthyr Tydfil in 1835. 1925. He invented this, but then let it out to the world. He never had his name associated to it, never earned any money off it, but then literally it went around the world. Like Trevithick, that other famous Cornish inventor that came to Merthyr, Adrian Stephens died in relative obscurity, really, outside of Merthyr. Merthyr people were always keen to push his invention and to make claims and statements on his behalf, because he just wasn't that type of guy. He was just literally pushing on. He was quite eccentric, but he was an inventor. He wasn't really focused on the success that those inventions would bring. He would eventually pass away after a long illness on Christmas Day in 1876, and his house that he lived in and eventually passed away in is still standing today, 77 Lower Thomas Street, which strangely enough is literally opposite Merthyr's main train station. Now Tesco's is there and everything, but back in the day it would have been a bustling centre of trains, and so every day that that man would have woken up, he would have heard that invention, the sound of his invention ringing. This object is one of the most important objects in our museum collection, really, and it is totally and utterly unique. Things like this were not kept. It's just lucky beyond belief, and we are greatly in debt to the people who worked in Gueskeen and Nettlefold back in 1922 that had the foresight to take this off the boiler it was attached to and bring it to us to preserve for all the rest of time, really. As long as we are here, this will be here, and it's an amazing invention, and it's certainly a Merthyr first. So I hope you've enjoyed looking at the world's first steam whistle, and I hope you've learned a little bit more about Adrian Stephens. But thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.